Right now, there is something in your life that you know is holding you back. A habit, a reaction, a pattern you've promised yourself you would change, but somehow it keeps showing up again and again. Not because you're weak, not because you lack discipline, but because that pattern once served a purpose and no one ever showed you how to break it. The truth is, nothing changes until you decide it must. And today is about making that decision. This is about taking back control from automatic reactions, unconscious habits, and old emotional loops that no longer serve the person you are becoming. Because the moment you learn how to break a negative pattern, you don't just change one behavior, you change the direction of your life. Every negative pattern in your life started long before you realized it was there. It didn't show up overnight. It was built moment by moment, experience by experience, emotion by emotion. At some point in your past, your mind made a decision to protect you, to help you survive, to help you feel safe or accepted. And that decision became automatic. You didn't sit down and consciously choose fear, procrastination, self-doubt, or avoidance. Those patterns were installed through repetition and emotion, and over time they became unconscious. That's the most important truth. You must understand the pattern is not who you are, it's something your mind learned to do. Once something becomes unconscious, it runs on autopilot. You don't question it. You don't challenge it. You simply react. A situation appears, your nervous system fires, your emotions surge, and before you even think, you're back in the same behavior again, same response, same outcome. And the reason it feels so powerful is because you're not fighting the problem, you're asleep to the process creating it. You can't change what you don't notice. Awareness is the moment control returns to your hands. The instant you bring conscious attention to an unconscious pattern, its grip weakens. Think about it. The pattern survives in darkness. It survives because you identify with it. You say, this is just who I am, but the moment you say, this is something I do, instead of, this is who I am, everything shifts. Now there's space between you and the behavior, and in that space lies choice. That space is power. Your brain is designed to conserve energy. It loves patterns because patterns require less effort. Once a response has been repeated enough times with emotional intensity, the brain locks it in. That's why negative patterns feel so natural. They're familiar. And familiarity often feels like truth, even when it's destroying your potential. But familiarity is not destiny. It's simply conditioning. When you become aware of the exact moment the pattern begins, what triggers it, what emotion shows up, what story you tell yourself, you interrupt the loop. You step out of reaction and into observation. And observation alone begins to change the wiring. You're no longer the prisoner of the pattern. You're the witness. And a witness can choose differently. Awareness is not passive. It's active. It's asking yourself better questions in the moment. What am I really feeling right now? What am I afraid might happen? What belief is driving this reaction? Those questions wake you up. And once you're awake, the pattern cannot run you the same way again. You don't break negative patterns by fighting them with willpower. You break them by understanding them. Awareness is the first domino. When it falls, everything else becomes possible. Because the moment you see the pattern clearly, you remember something powerful. You are not broken. You were programmed, and anything programmed can be changed. Most people believe their problems come from circumstances, from other people, from the past, or from a lack of resources. But the truth is far more empowering and far more confronting at the same time. The real driver behind every negative pattern is not the situation itself. It's the emotional state you're in when that situation appears. Your state determines how you interpret reality, how you respond, and ultimately what you create. Change the state, and the pattern loses its foundation. Think about it. You can face the same challenge on 2 different days and respond in completely different ways. One day you feel confident, energized, and focused, and the problem feels small, even exciting. Another day you feel tired, overwhelmed, and uncertain, and the same problem feels impossible. The situation didn't change. You did. Your emotional state is the lens through which life is experienced. And when that lens is distorted, your behavior follows. Negative patterns survive because they are tied to familiar emotional states. Stress, fear, frustration, guilt, boredom, these states act like triggers. Once the body enters that state, the mind searches for the old solution it knows best. Not the best solution, the familiar one. That's why people keep repeating behaviors they intellectually know are harmful. In that state, logic has no authority. Emotion runs the system. If you want to break a negative pattern, you must stop trying to solve it while staying in the same emotional state that created it. You cannot outthink a state, you must outmove it. The body comes first. Physiology shapes emotion. Emotion shapes focus. Focus shapes action. This is not theory, it's how you're wired. The fastest way to change any pattern is to change your physical state immediately. Your breathing, your posture, your movement, your voice. These are not small things. They are switches. Shallow breathing creates anxiety. Collapsed posture feeds uncertainty. Slow, heavy movement reinforces sadness. But deep breathing, strong posture, decisive movement, and purposeful tone shift your nervous system in seconds. When the body changes, the mind follows. This is why waiting to feel motivated never works. Action creates emotion, not the other way around. When you move with intensity, when you take control of your physiology, you send a new signal to your brain. You tell it, we are not in danger. We are in control. And once that signal is sent, the old pattern loses its fuel. Your state is not something that happens to you. It's something you practice, whether consciously or unconsciously. Most people practice stress every day. They practice worry, hesitation, and self-doubt until it becomes automatic. But you can practice power just as consistently. Confidence is not a personality trait. It's a state you enter by choice. When you master your emotional state, you master the doorway to every pattern in your life. You stop asking, why does this keep happening to me? And you start asking, what state am I in right now? That question alone gives you leverage, because the moment you shift your state, the pattern has nothing left to stand on. Every action you take and every action you avoid is driven by one simple force, the desire to move away from pain or move toward pleasure. This is not a theory, it's the operating system of human behavior. You don't wake up in the morning and consciously decide your habits based on logic alone. You are pulled by what your nervous system believes will bring comfort, safety, or reward, and pushed by what it believes will cause pain, embarrassment, loss, or rejection. Once you understand this, negative patterns stop being mysterious and start making sense. A negative pattern continues not because it feels good in the long term, but because it provides some form of immediate relief. Procrastination avoids the pain of pressure. Anger avoids the pain of vulnerability. Distraction avoids the pain of uncertainty. Even self-sabotage can protect you from the pain of potential failure. The mind doesn't care about your future goals in the moment. It cares about emotional survival now. So it chooses the behavior that reduces discomfort fastest. At the same time, the mind associates pain with change. Growth requires effort, discipline, uncertainty, and temporary discomfort. And unless you consciously rewire those associations, your brain will resist change every time. It will tell you stories, it will rationalize, it will delay, not because it wants to destroy your life, but because it wants to keep you safe based on outdated rules. This is where transformation actually happens. You don't break a pattern by trying to eliminate pain. You break it by changing what your brain associates with pain and pleasure. You must link massive pain to staying the same and massive pleasure to changing. As long as staying stuck feels safer than stepping forward, the pattern will win. Ask yourself this: what pain have I been avoiding by keeping this pattern? And what pain has this pattern already cost me? Lost opportunities, damaged confidence, broken promises to yourself, years of potential left untouched. When you bring those costs into focus emotionally, not intellectually, the brain starts to shift. The comfort of the pattern begins to feel expensive. At the same time, you must attach real pleasure to the new behavior, not vague hope, but vivid reward. Who do you become when you break this pattern? How do you feel waking up knowing you're in control? How does your energy change? How does your future expand? The brain moves toward what it can feel. Make the reward real enough and action becomes natural. Rewiring pain and pleasure is not a one-time event. It's repetition with emotion. Each time you interrupt the old pattern and follow through on the new behavior, even briefly, you reinforce a new association. The brain learns through experience, not intention. When you consciously decide what pain you're willing to endure and what pleasure you're committed to creating, you take back control of your behavior. You stop being driven by old survival wiring and start being guided by purpose. And once pain and pleasure are aligned with the future you want, negative patterns no longer stand a chance. Negative patterns only feel powerful because they run in motion. They have momentum. Once they start, they pull you forward almost automatically, like a train already moving down the tracks. Most people try to stop the train with thought alone, but by the time they start thinking, the pattern is already in control. The real secret to breaking any negative pattern is interruption. You must break the momentum before it completes the loop. Patterns begin with a trigger, but they continue because of certainty. In that moment, your mind becomes certain about how things will go. Certain you'll fail. Certain it's not worth trying. Certain you'll feel the same disappointment again. Certainty is powerful, and whatever you feel certain about, your nervous system will obey. To break the pattern, you must disrupt that certainty immediately. The fastest way to do that is through decisive physical and mental interruption. When the pattern starts, do something unexpected. Chant up fast. Change your breathing. Move with intensity. Use your voice. Clap your hands. Take a cold splash of water. These actions may seem simple, but they work because the body and mind are inseparable. A sudden physical shift shocks the nervous system out of autopilot. At the same time, you must interrupt the internal dialogue. Negative patterns are fueled by repetitive language. The same phrases replay again and again, reinforcing the same emotional response. If you let that voice continue, the pattern will regain control. So you cut it off. Say, stop out loud. Ask a question that demands focus. What is the most powerful thing I can do right now? How do I want to show up in this moment? Questions shift attention, and attention changes state. Momentum breaks the moment certainty changes. When you interrupt the pattern with enough intensity, the brain becomes uncertain about what comes next. That moment of uncertainty is your opening. It's where choice lies, and most people waste it by drifting back to the familiar. Instead, you must act immediately in a new direction. Even a small action, taken decisively, creates a new trajectory. Waiting weakens interruption. Hesitation invites the old pattern back in action. Even imperfect action locks in the brake. Make a call. Write one sentence. Take one step forward. Speak one truth. Movement creates evidence, and evidence builds new certainty. This is why willpower alone fails. Willpower is fragile in the face of emotional momentum. But interruption changes the game entirely. You're not trying to overpower the pattern. You're cutting the power source. Every time you interrupt a pattern and move differently, you weaken the old wiring. The brain learns that the pattern is no longer inevitable. And once inevitability disappears, freedom becomes possible. You don't need to wait for the pattern to disappear before you act. You act to make it disappear. Momentum is broken in moments, not months. One strong interruption, repeated consistently, is enough to take back control of your life. Lasting change does not come from forcing yourself to behave differently. It comes from deciding at the deepest level who you are. Behavior follows identity. If you only try to change what you do, you will eventually fall back into old patterns. But when you change who you believe you are, the old patterns no longer make sense to maintain. This is where real transformation happens. Every negative pattern is connected to an identity, even if you've never said it out loud. I'm not disciplined. I always mess things up. I'm the kind of person who quits. These statements become instructions to your nervous system. Your brain works relentlessly to stay consistent with who you believe you are, even when that belief is painful. Consistency feels safer than growth. To break a negative pattern permanently, you must create a new identity that is more compelling than the old one. Not a wish, not a hope, but a decision. Identity is not discovered, it is chosen. The moment you decide, this is who I am now, your brain begins to look for evidence to support that decision. A new identity must be tied to values, not just outcomes. Outcomes can change. Circumstances can shake them, but values anchor behavior. Decide what you stand for. Decide what you tolerate and what you no longer accept. When your standards rise, your patterns are forced to follow. You don't need to fight the old behavior. It simply violates the new standard. Replacement is critical. Nature hates a vacuum, and so does your mind. If you remove a pattern without replacing it, the old one will return. You must install a new pattern that fits your chosen identity. If you were someone who avoided challenges, become someone who takes action even when uncertain. If you were someone who reacted emotionally, become someone who pauses and chooses deliberately. Then prove it through small, consistent actions. Identity is reinforced through evidence. Each time you act in alignment with your new identity, even in a small way, you strengthen it. One decision doesn't change a life. A pattern of aligned decisions does. And the brain does not argue with evidence. It accepts what you repeatedly show it. You will feel resistance. That does not mean the identity is wrong. It means the old identity is being challenged. Growth always feels uncomfortable at first because the brain is leaving familiar territory. Stay with it. The discomfort is temporary. The identity you build is permanent. When you live from identity, discipline becomes natural. Motivation becomes irrelevant. You don't need to hype yourself up to act in alignment with who you believe you are. You simply do it. The moment you stop asking, how do I change this habit? And start asking, who must I become? Everything shifts. Negative patterns lose their grip because they no longer belong to the person you've decided to be. And once identity changes, the past no longer controls the future. Breaking negative patterns is not about fixing what's wrong with you. It's about remembering what's right with you. Every pattern that once controlled you is learned, and anything learned can be unlearned. The moment you bring awareness, take control of your state, rewire pain and pleasure, interrupt momentum, and choose a stronger identity, you step back into your power. Change does not require years of struggle. It requires a decision followed by consistent action. You are not your past reactions, your old habits, or your former limitations. You are the one who decides what happens next. And the moment you decide with certainty, the pattern that once held you back no longer has a place in your life.